Book 1, The Blazing Ronin, Wandering Blades. Chapter 9, The Kunoichi Rivalry. The pale light of dawn was just beginning to filter through the ornate shoji screens as Akira and his allies made their way through the winding corridors of Lord Ito's palace. The young Ronin led the way, his emerald katana held at the ready as he guided them deeper into the complex's shadowed depths. At his side strode the lithe form of Hana, the former Crimson Lotus assassin. The kunoichi moved with her usual feline grace, her kama scythes gripped tightly as she scanned their surroundings for any potential threats. Despite her outward poise, Akira could sense the undercurrent of tension thrumming through the woman's lithe form. She had been unusually taciturn since their meeting with the mysterious merchant Toshiro Nakamura the previous night. The Ronin's brow furrowed slightly as he studied Hana's profile. There was something weighing on the assassin's mind, some unspoken burden that even her formidable skills could not conceal fully. He opened his mouth to address her when a familiar voice broke the tense silence. "You seem uncharacteristically brooding this morning, little viper." Akira and Hana turned to see Kozue emerge from one of the adjoining corridors, the towering Ravager falling into step just behind them. The crimson-armored warrior's eyes seemed to glow from within his fearsome mask as he leveled his intense gaze at the kunoichi. "Do not tell me the gravity of our mission is finally sinking in? Or perhaps you are simply lamenting all the glorious battles you will be denied by remaining in the shadows." The giant rumbled a low chuckle, resting his maces across his shoulders as he studied Hana appraisingly. The assassin tensed, her eyes narrowing behind her mask as she whirled to face the Ravager fully. "Do not presume to know my mind or motivations, Kozue," she spat, her lightly accented voice laced with barely restrained venom. "I have forgotten more about the true arts of shadow and deception than you could ever hope to learn." Hana leveled the point of her kama at the crimson-armored warrior, her next words carrying a biting edge. "So unless you wish to discover just how glorious my blades can be firsthand, I would suggest holding that arrogant tongue of yours." Kozue seemed utterly unfazed by the kunoichi's barbed threats. He simply regarded her for a moment before giving a slight shake of his head, his deep voice tinged with dark amusement. "Still as hot-headed and reckless as ever, I see. Though I suppose I should not be surprised, such impulsiveness is to be expected from one of the Crimson Lotus lesser assassins." The Ravager's eyes seemed to glow brighter from within his mask as Hana visibly bristled at the insult, her grip tightening around her scythe hilts. "Do not think I have forgotten how quickly you were bested during our first encounter, little viper. It would seem the stories of your order's skills were greatly exaggerated." A tense silence fell over the corridor as Kozue's words hung heavy in the air. Akira could sense the venom and barely restrained fury radiating from Hana like a miasma. The kunoichi seemed to swell with righteous indignation, her chest heaving beneath her form-fitting body wrap. "You arrogant, bloated sack of offal!" she hissed through gritted teeth. "I'll have your tongue for that insult." With a feral shout, Hana launched herself at the towering Ravager in a blur of motion. Her kama scythes became a whirling dervish of flashing steel, raining down from every conceivable angle in a blistering series of slashes and thrusts. But Kozue was no stranger to the assassin's speed and ferocity. With an almost casual air, the crimson-armored warrior batted aside each wicked strike with deft sweeps of his maces. His booming laughter echoed through the corridor as Hana's onslaught slowly began to falter. "Is that the best you can muster, little viper?" he taunted, his deep voice laced with dark amusement. "I was expecting more of a challenge from one of the Crimson Lotus elite killers." Hana snarled something vile in response, redoubling her furious assault with renewed ferocity. But no matter how quickly she struck or from what angle, Kozue's defense remained impenetrable. The towering warrior seemed to anticipate and deflect her every attack with almost contemptuous ease. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the kunoichi broke off with a frustrated shout. She backpedaled rapidly, putting distance between them as she panted for breath. Her eyes burned with fury and humiliation from behind her mask as she leveled her scythes at the Ravager once more. "Do not think this is over, Kozue," Hana spat, her chest heaving. I'll have your head on a pike before this is through, mark my words. The crimson-armored warrior threw back his head and laughed, the sound booming through the corridor like rolling thunder. Idle threats from an idle mind, assassin. But I would expect nothing less from one who has clearly lost her edge over the years. Kozue leveled his intense gaze at Hana, his next words carrying a biting edge that made the kunoichi visibly tense. Perhaps if you had not allowed yourself to be distracted from your training, you may have actually posed a challenge. But I suppose even the great Crimson Lotus has its failures who simply cannot resist the call of the flesh. The Ravager's eyes seemed to glow brighter from within his mask as he leaned in slightly, as if imparting a great secret. How is your former lover these days, little viper? Still as skilled and deadly as when she bested you all those years ago? A shocked silence fell over the corridor as the weight of Kozue's words hung in the air. Akira watched as a myriad of emotions played across Hana's features, shock, anger, hatred, and finally a simmering fury that made her entire body tremble. The kunoichi opened her mouth to respond, but seemed to think better of it. Instead, she whirled on her heel and stalked away, disappearing around the nearest corner in a swirl of shadow and outrage. Kozue watched her departure with an air of dark satisfaction before turning to regard Akira and Keiya. The young woman looked at the towering Ravager with a mixture of confusion and trepidation written across her features. What was that about?" she asked hesitantly. "A former lover? Besting Hana?" The crimson-armored warrior seemed to consider her query for a moment before giving a slight shake of his head. "It is not my place to divulge the secrets and shames of the Crimson Lotus, no matter how entertaining," he rumbled at last. "Though I will say this, that assassin has clearly been carrying a heavy burden for many years now. One that may threaten to undermine everything we are trying to accomplish here." Kozue leveled his intense gaze at Akira, his next words carrying a heavy weight. "You would be wise to get a handle on your subordinates, Blazing Ronin. Before their past transgressions and divided loyalties lead us all into the fires of oblivion itself." With that ominous pronouncement, the towering Ravager turned and continued down the corridor, leaving Akira and Keiya to ponder his words in silence. The young warrior felt a growing sense of trepidation tightening his chest. He knew Hana was incredibly skilled and had sworn her blade to his cause. But if what Kozue implied was true, that she harbored some deep, personal rift that could potentially undermine everything, Akira would need to tread carefully. The Ronin's emerald gaze slid to Keiya, studying the young woman's concerned expression for a moment before giving her a slight nod of reassurance. Then, with his katana leading the way, he set off once more into the palace's shadowed depths. Though his path was quickly leading them into the crucible of the coming battle against Lord Ito's elite forces, Akira could not help but feel a strange sense of unease creeping in. As if the true threat they faced was not the shogun's armies or the ancient evils he had allied himself with, but something far more insidious, lurking just beneath the surface. A rift within the ranks of the Blazing Vanguard itself, one that could potentially tear everything apart from the inside before the true fight had even begun. Several hours later found Akira meditating in a secluded alcove, allowing his mind to still and focus amidst the chaos swirling around them. He could sense the growing tension, the palpable miasma of dread and uncertainty that had settled over the rest of the vanguard in the wake of Hana's confrontation with Kozue. The Ronin's brow furrowed slightly as his mind replayed the Ravager's words. A former lover who had bested the kunoichi assassin years ago? And one who was seemingly just as skilled and deadly as Hana herself, if not more so? It raised a myriad of troubling questions that Akira knew he would need answers to sooner rather than later. He could not afford to have such personal rifts and divided loyalties threatening to undermine everything they had accomplished so far. As if summoned by his thoughts, the young warrior's enhanced senses picked up the telltale sounds of someone approaching. Familiar light footfalls, the faint whisper of cloth against skin. "You can cease your skulking in the shadows, assassin," Akira stated without opening his eyes. "I know you are there." A tense beat of silence followed before Hana seemed to materialize from the shadows beside him. The kunoichi regarded the Ronin warily for a moment before giving a slight nod and settling into a crouch across from him. "You have questions," she said at last, her lightly accented voice tinged with resignation. "About what that arrogant oaf Kozue said earlier. The implications he made about my past." Hana's eyes seemed to burn from within the depths of her mask as she leveled her intense stare at Akira. "So go ahead and ask, Blazing Ronin. I would have it all laid bare between us before we march into the fires of oblivion itself." The young warrior regarded the kunoichi for a long moment, feeling the weight of her words pressing down on his shoulders. Finally, he gave a slow nod and opened his eyes, holding Hana's gaze steadily. "Very well. Tell me about this former lover that Kozue spoke of. The one who seemingly got the better of you at some point, despite your incredible skills." Hana was silent for a long moment, seeming to wrestle with some great internal struggle. Just when Akira thought she would refuse to answer, the assassin finally spoke in a low, measured tone. "Her name is Katsumi. We were intimate companions for a time, when we were both acolytes training under the same Crimson Lotus masters." The kunoichi's eyes seemed to blaze with a mixture of shame and fury as the words spilled from her lips. "Our relationship was intense, to say the least. Two incredibly skilled warriors, bound together by passion, desire, and an unquenchable thirst to be the absolute best. We pushed each other to heights neither of us could have achieved alone through our sparring, our competitions." Hana fell silent for a moment, her expression unreadable behind her mask. When she continued, her voice took on a harder edge laced with bitterness. "But such intensity could not be sustained forever. Eventually, one of us had to emerge as the superior, and Katsumi was the one who managed to best me, again and again until I could no longer delude myself." The assassin's fists clenched tightly, her entire body tensing with barely restrained emotion. She was a true prodigy, her skills with the blade and the shadowed arts were unmatched by any of her peers. While I was still struggling to master the most basic techniques, Katsumi seemed to transcend them entirely. Akira remained silent, sensing there was more to Hana's tale. The kunoichi seemed to struggle with herself for a moment before finally continuing in a low, resentful tone. "Our relationship became strained, increasingly toxic as I was slowly consumed by jealousy and shame at being so thoroughly outmatched. Until one day, it all came to a head in a vicious confrontation that left us both bloodied and broken." Hana's eyes seemed to burn brighter from within her mask as she leveled her stare at the Ronin. "I tried to kill her, Akira. My former lover, my dearest companion. I allowed my own weakness and hubris to drive me to strike her down in an act of unspeakable dishonor and cowardice." The assassin fell silent once more, seeming to wrestle with the weight of her own admission. Akira studied her for a long moment, feeling a strange sense of sadness and disappointment tightening his chest. "And did you succeed?" he asked at last, his deep voice tinged with quiet intensity. "Did you take Katsumi's life in that moment of madness?" Hana shook her head slowly, her next words barely above a whisper. "No. She disarmed and incapacitated me with ease. As if she had been holding back the entire time, allowing me to delude myself into thinking I was her equal." The kunoichi's fists clenched once more until her knuckles shone bone white. "After that disgraceful display, I was cast out from the Crimson Lotus in shame. Forbidden from ever setting foot in their sanctums again until I had redeemed myself and regained my honor." Akira was silent for a long moment, allowing the weight of Hana's tale to hang in the air. He could not help but feel a strange sense of disappointment and even pity for the assassin's plight. Finally, the Ronin found his voice once more, holding the kunoichi's intense stare steadily. "I did not ask for this story to pass judgment, Hana," he stated, his deep voice resonating with quiet conviction. "Every warrior has regrets, moments of weakness or dishonor that they must eventually overcome and atone for. What matters is how you choose to move forward from here." Akira slowly rose to his feet, resting one hand on his katana's hilt as he regarded the assassin with his piercing emerald gaze. You swore your blade to my cause, to combat the ancient evils threatening to consume these lands and restore balance, no matter the cost. So I will ask you again, here and now. The Ronin's voice took on a strange, reverberating quality as his pulsing markings flared briefly with ethereal energy. Where does your loyalty lie, Kunoichi? With the path of redemption and honor? Or with the shadows of your past that would seek to drag you back into oblivion? Hana seemed to swell with a mixture of emotions, shame, anger, and finally a burning determination as she rose to face Akira fully. The assassin met the Ronin's intense stare unflinchingly, her next words carrying the unmistakable weight of conviction. You have my loyalty, Blazing Ronin. My blade, my skills, my very life is sworn to your cause and your path of redemption. The Kunoichi's eyes seemed to blaze from within her mask as she leveled her stare at Akira. If I must face Katsumi again and finally earn back my honor, then so be it. I will cut her down without hesitation this time, and any others who would dare stand against us. The young warrior held Hana's gaze for a long moment before giving a solemn nod of acceptance. He could sense the truth burning in her words, the intensity of her convictions. Then let that be an end to it, Akira stated, turning to continue on their path deeper into the palace's depths. We have greater challenges awaiting us than ghosts of the past and lingering regrets. As the Ronin began striding away, Hana fell into step just behind him. Despite the Kunoichi's reassurances, Akira could not help but feel a lingering sense of unease gnawing at him. For if Katsumi was truly as skilled as the assassin claimed, and still harbored a grudge from their violent falling out all those years ago,